Not to belabor the point, but he shows that radioactivity can change with temperature. Can you imagine? The tritium counts, the beta counts, were declining, then they went up again. And he even measured the pressure of tritium in this Geiger counter. There was no evidence that the tritium, this line of pressure of tritium, was declining, so it wasn't just being outgassed. The tritium counts were being somehow affected by the lattice of the little nanoparticles that they were in, and then they came back up. But now we even have evidence, copious evidence, that heavy element changes that last can exist. This is both an interesting scientific commentary as well as a political commentary. Here's our own Los Alamos National Laboratory with an internally peer-reviewed paper that was allowed to go out. Tritium evolution, that means production, from various morphologies of palladium by Tuggle, Clater, and Taylor at Los Alamos. The fact that the director of Los Alamos National Laboratory is not taking the production of tritium, which is an ingredient in nuclear weapons, seriously, is a scandal. Just think about it. I mean, if this is right, forget whether it is right, but suppose it were right. Don't we have all sorts of things in our intelligence community that they should be looking at? And whoever the director is at the moment, the fact that he's not taking action on this, I think, will ultimately become a very serious dereliction of duty. That is an issue when Congress eventually investigates. I'll try not to go too far into this, but the whole thing is heavy Watergate. That's how you characterize it. After the cold fusion war is won, as it will be won before too much longer, perhaps somebody will allow me to write a book called Heavy Watergate, and maybe I'll get paid back for all those things that I lost for resigning from MIT and not making the big bucks all those years. This is the guy on the right, the Darth Vader of cold fusion, John Huizenga, who is most responsible, the single individual who is most responsible for the disaster of cold fusion in the United States. He was asked by the federal government, Bush, down to Admiral Watkins, Secretary of Energy at the time, on to some other individual, to head a panel to investigate these claims of cold fusion in the spring of '89. He told them, don't even bother having a panel. And he writes this in his book. His book is called Cold Fusion, the Scientific Fiasco of the Century. It's beautiful. He confirms everything we knew and more. He said, don't have a panel. But of course, a few weeks later, when cold fusion wasn't going away, his God-ordained or science-ordained mission in life was to kill cold fusion. And so he took up the responsibility. His co-panelist, Norman Ramsey, was much less involved and is a hero, I think. He tried to resign on the last day of the panel. By the way, the panel pretty much came to its conclusions in 3 months, even though numerous experiments were still underway. Positive data was rolling in. Huizenga wanted it killed completely. Ramsey threatened to resign. No national news media reported that, even though it was a public meeting. And he got instead a kind of a preamble in the report that said, well, you know, we can't tell it for sure that it's nonsense, and there might be some studies that should be done between positive and negative groups. They should get together, etc. The whole thing was a charade and a farce, because let's face it, when the Department of Energy issues a negative report, it's believed. And so cold fusion was in effect killed by DOE and above all Huizenga. If Huizenga had just been a tiny little bit more, or maybe a lot more open, and had just left it as an open question in science, everything would have been fine. The New York Times would then have been required to write about it, right? And the Nature magazine would have been required to follow the unfolding story. But this gave them permission to make a joke about it, which they did. And of course, John Maddox was one of the worst joke makers. He appeared on, the editor of Nature magazine, he appeared on the NOVA program against cold fusion and other programs subsequently. He said, I think that broadly speaking, it's dead, and it will remain dead for a long, long time. He felt, with all due respect, I practiced that British accent for a few years. It's not quite authentic, even with all my discussions with Chris Tinsley. Chris would give a much more entertaining talk. I wish we could bring him in next time. Okay. this was Steve Koonin at Caltech. We are suffering from the delusions and incompetence of doctors Pons and Fleischmann. This is just part of the cold fusion war and interesting things that happened right about the time that my book came out. Theoretical physicist Frank Close of England did the book Too Hot to Handle, in which he pretty much said that Pons and Fleischmann were frauds. They had shifted their gamma curves to indicate that they had neutrons, which is baloney. He won't give up that fraud theory. He's proud of that fraud theory. It is totally wrong. And I say about Frank Close's book, he wasn't even frank and he wasn't close. So many people have heard that now that I always fear that it's going to fall flat. Nature was beautiful. During the time of the third international conference in Nagoya, I attended all the conferences except the one at Como, Italy. I was so fed up with MIT and the disaster there after I resigned in June of '91. I just got into an RV, not cold fusion powered, and went across the country, visited Hal Fox and lots of other national monuments at the time, and just had to get away. Oh, I didn't mean that you were a national monument. That kind of, although Hal should be a national monument. But look at this, Nagoya. I mean, here's Nature pontificating on October 29th, '92, referring to the NTT laboratory in Japan helium result. It says, NTT researchers have no paper published or submitted to back up their claim of helium. The company's public relations department could not even provide an abstract for the announcement. They were not there at the conference. They didn't care about the truth. They didn't issue a correction. They are dedicated to falsehood, at least on this subject. But it all began with my formerly esteemed colleagues at MIT that I used to serve as a publicist, or propagandist, should I say, for hot fusion. In the week prior to May 1st of 1989, the director of the Plasma Fusion Center at MIT plotted to plant a story. The Boston Globe was too favorable to cold fusion for his tastes. You know, they feared that $25 million might be shifted by the Congress to cold fusion research that was asked. And so they wanted to axe it, okay? So he got Nick Tate, the reporter from the Boston Herald, which is a tabloid and not always relied upon. Yeah?
Quick message, I'm sorry.
Okay. George Weissman needs to go to registration immediately. Urgent message, okay? Sorry to bring that. But in any event, they plotted with Nick Tate. They gave him dirt. They gave him dirt. I didn't know about this. They told him pretty much that they had determined that Pons and Fleischmann were frauds, okay? And he used the word schlock science. Fortunately, it was on tape. The interview was taped. Nick Tate wasn't intending to tape it, but when he heard Parker joyously talking to his colleagues at other universities like Richard Garwin and so forth, he was talking to Garwin at the time, oh, we got him now, and so forth. Got him with their pants down or whatever it was. Fraud, fraud, fraud. The word was used 5 times. Of course, Nick pressed the tape button, which is perfectly right when you're a reporter and Parker saw the tape running. But when the story finally came out and the words fraud were in there, that is, Parker attributing word fraud attributed to Parker, he got afraid because he thought Pons and Fleischmann might sue him. But he was glad that the effect happened. This was the first instance of a person calling Pons and Fleischmann a fraud in public. And the very next day, May 1st, the day that this was published, that evening actually,